I became the black sheep, and I was the black sheep a lot, especially in the Indian culture. My name is Roopa Grewal, and I'm Indian, meaning I was born in India. So I'm Indian, not Native American. And I was with NAMI San Francisco for 10 years, and was also with NAMI Alameda County South and NAMI California, and then I worked for NAMI San Diego for a year and a half. So I've been in with NAMI, it's been a little over 11 years. So now I'm a certified peer support specialist, I'm a trainer, I'm a facilitator. I was born in India, and my real mom and dad were my grandmother and grandfather. And in India we had so much family around all the time, and it was, house is always full, and it's a really warm and validating environment. And then when I was about 1.5 years old, my dad had started living in Canada, and so we met, my mom and I went and joined my dad in Canada. And it just felt like I was being taken from my parent in this warm, validating environment and going to this cold country with these cold people who I didn't know as my parents. They were just people who were in the house. And I think that for me is the basis for my borderline personality disorder. And by the time I was 5 is when I asked my mom about depression, and I said, you know, Mom, what is depression? And she kind of laughed, of course. And I said, is it like really sad? And she said, yeah. And I said, well, I think I'm depressed. So I knew that something was wrong with me at a pretty early age. I could see it and feel it, and I knew I was different and inappropriate or weird, and just felt like I was different, basically. And so by the time I was 16, I finally just had the guts to go to my dad and say, Dad, can I see a psychologist? And for me, I think ever since I was 5, I was accepting of it and wanted to do something about it, but I didn't have the power, and I didn't have anyone, I never had a champion. So my parents were, of course, in total denial. So what can you do when you're 5 or 10 or 12? So at 15 or 16, I'm sorry, my dad took me to dinner alone because my parents had noticed strange behaviors, or like I'd come home from high school and put on prayer music and just go to sleep, or, you know, it wasn't really normal teenage stuff. And so my dad took me out, and I remember like thinking to myself, maybe my dad can help me. Like, what if I give him a chance? Like, what if I just ask him? And I asked him if I could see a psychologist, and he said, okay. And then I was like, well, do you think I need to see a psychiatrist? Because, you know, I've been doing these, you know, back then we just called them cutting behaviors. So, you know, I was doing this self-harm, and my dad's response mainly was that, you know, I'm doing that for attention. So when I asked him, you know, well, if I'm doing it for attention, but you haven't known for 2 years, so how could that be for attention? He basically said it was like a teenage syndrome of some sort, so like a phase. So he was not going to let me see a psychiatrist. He was, I can tell you now that I wish I had seen a psychiatrist at that age. I wish I had started on medication at 16. I feel like my life would have been so much different. But he said, yeah, I know you don't need to see a psychiatrist because I'm a psychiatrist and there's nothing wrong with you. And so for me, the acceptance came really quickly and early, and it comes every day. And I tell people, it's like diabetes. Like, if a person has diabetes, they're going to have diabetes until they die, right? Unless they find a cure, which I hope they do. And any mental disorder is the same. I'm going to have borderline personality disorder until I die, and I'm going to be really out and proud about it and talk about it. But I can manage my symptoms. I can be living in recovery. A lot of people call it remission. But I live successfully with this disorder because I manage it. And so I will probably have this in me till I die. I think that, like most people say about BPD, it's the environment made a big difference for me, but I think that I was genetically predisposed. And now I can tell you, wow, both of my parents have borderline traits. I don't know if they have the disorder because I'm not a doctor, but my goodness. So the biggest thing was my dad. He just couldn't accept it. So I did start seeing a psychologist, and she said, you know, you're 16 and you live at home, so you should bring your family. Bring your parents every week. And so my mom went every week, and my dad was like, I don't need to go. I'm a psychiatrist. I know everything. Again, we're Indian, and my dad probably came here in like 1972, and I came here in 1973, and it was early 70s Indian people. So it's not, it's a lot harder being, I think, in certain groups. And, you know, I'll just speak for Indians. I know I've heard about Asian culture and all these other cultures, but I can tell you myself, for Indian people, it's a huge thing, and it's a huge flaw, and it's a huge weakness, and you should be able to pull yourself up by the bootstraps or change your attitude. And I can tell you that as someone who's always been really optimistic and really hopeful and really positive, to the point that it like bothers people sometimes, it's not your attitude, because I proved that. I feel like most Indian people view mental illness or a mental disorder as something wrong with your head, like you're crazy, but not like there's something wrong with your brain, like maybe, you know, because I have an enlarged hypothalamus, I have borderline personality disorder, but more like there's something crazy about you. It's definitely looked at as a flaw, a weakness, and you should never talk about it. Yeah. So yeah, being Indian definitely made it a lot harder. There's a lot of stigma, and that's why I talk about it, and I'm out and proud about it, and I say I have borderline personality disorder, and I say I was born in India. And believe it or not, Indian people have reached out to me, like on Facebook or on my email, saying, I can't talk to anyone about this because I'm so ashamed, but I saw your Facebook post or whatever. And so I'm trying. So I was not diagnosed correctly with borderline personality disorder until I was 32. And the first time I met with a therapist, I was 15 or 16, maybe 16. And the diagnosis was always depression, dysthymia. That's about it. I knew that I definitely knew the depression. I also had a lot of obsessive compulsive disorder when I was very young, which I still have some of it today, but I manage it. So I knew that I had had panic attacks, and I had had these feelings of shame and this depression, and I know how obsessive I was about everything. But until I was 32, I never heard of borderline personality disorder. And that's not that rare. Borderline personality disorder is surrounded by what NAMI refers to as a surplus stigma, because even providers stigmatize borderline personality disorder. So my main thing was relief. I was so happy. You know, there were all these people out there, and they're like, you know, I don't like these labels. And I was like, I'm so glad I have the right label, because I finally had the right and accurate diagnosis, and now I could go to work with it. Like, my enemy now had a name, and I was ready to take it on. So I actually felt very empowered. The people I know who have mental health disorders are living successfully and in recovery, but also some of the strongest people I know. They've been through things that they've experienced emotions, they've been through traumas that other people may never know, and they come out the other side and they're stronger. And now they want to help other people. And now everyone I meet, I don't hide my disorder. I don't throw it out there unless someone's talking about mental illness, but I don't hide it at all. And I talk about it proudly. And it's about the recovery. It's not, you know, where you are necessarily today all by itself. It's in context. It's like compared to where I was when I was 6 and 15 and 25 and 30, I'm in a totally different place, or in a totally better place. And now I concentrate on things like authenticity, and mainly I'm just working on using compassion and empathy to help others. And I believe in, part of my authenticity is that I'm vulnerable, and I can be vulnerable in front of people, and when I speak, and when I facilitate or whatever. And that vulnerability, I think, is a strength. And in our world, we always look at it as weakness. You know, if we can just put a little bit more, like, give people the benefit of the doubt and, you know, try to be more validating. I know it's really hard, but if we can just look at it like, yeah, well, this has taught me that everyone has something. So let's be nice to each other.